Movement rarely spreads evenly across space. It concentrates. Across land and sea, there are only a limited number of viable paths through which large systems can move. Terrain narrows options. Distance imposes constraints. And over time, movement compresses into corridors that cannot easily be avoided. These corridors become critical. This is Achronic, a long-form documentary series about power, geography, and time. Not events, not heroes, not chronology, structures that outlast empires. Political maps suggest that control is defined by territory. Borders expand, regions are occupied, states appear to grow outward. But territory alone does not guarantee control, because movement does not occur everywhere at once. It passes through specific locations, narrow straits between land masses, mountain passes that cut through barriers, river crossings that connect regions otherwise separated, artificial channels that shorten distance and redirect flow. These are choke points. They are not large. They are not always visible at first glance, but they concentrate movement, and wherever movement concentrates, control becomes possible. A system may appear vast, but if its movement depends on a small number of passages, its stability depends on those passages remaining open. Close them, and the system slows. Control them, and the system can be shaped. This creates dependency. Large systems begin to rely on locations that represent only a small fraction of their total size. Supply chains depend on continuity. Trade depends on predictable passage. Communication networks depend on uninterrupted flow. When these flows pass through narrow points, the system becomes structurally dependent on them. This dependency is not always visible during periods of stability, but it becomes evident when movement is disrupted. At that moment, the scale of the system is no longer its defining feature. Its vulnerability is. This concentration is not accidental. It is the result of constraints accumulating over time. Geography limits the number of viable routes. Distance increases the cost of deviation. Infrastructure reinforces existing paths rather than creating entirely new ones. As a result, movement does not distribute itself freely across space. It is gradually compressed into the paths that require the least resistance. Over time, these paths become dominant, not because they are chosen, but because alternatives become increasingly inefficient. A system may appear flexible, but its movement is often highly constrained, and those constraints define where control can exist. This is why power often appears disproportionate to size. A small location can influence a much larger system if it sits at a point where movement cannot bypass it. Trade routes converge not because they are designed that way, but because geography leaves few alternatives. Over time, infrastructure reinforces this concentration. Ports expand near narrow waterways. Cities grow at crossings. Logistics networks stabilize around passages that cannot be avoided. What begins as geography becomes a structure, and once that structure forms, it persists. Political systems recognize these locations. They fortify them. They compete for them. They build around them. But they do not create their importance. They inherit it. Because choke points are not strategic because of political decisions. They are strategic because geography has already limited the system. This creates a recurring pattern. Control is rarely about holding the largest area. It is about controlling the points through which movement must pass. A system can extend across vast regions and still depend on a narrow corridor. And that corridor becomes the point where influence concentrates. When movement is uninterrupted, systems appear stable. When movement is restricted, their structure becomes visible. Flows slow. Dependencies emerge. Constraints that were previously hidden begin to define the system. What seemed expansive reveals itself to be compressed. What seemed distributed reveals itself to depend on a few critical points. This is not an exception. It is a structural condition, because what appears as expansion is often compression in disguise. Movement does not spread freely across space. It narrows, aligns, and concentrates. And once it does, control is no longer distributed. It is located. Not across entire territories, but within the passages that make movement possible at all.